I want you to close your eyes for a second and just imagine a world that is visually stunning, almost suffocatingly beautiful, but also incredibly dark.
And not dark in a, a sinister way, necessarily.
No, not at all. I mean, literally dark, dimly lit. You're in a world of architectural shadows where the sun is just blocked out by these wide eaves and bamboo blinds.
Right. And inside, people are barely even visible to one another. They're hidden behind all these layers of silk screens and curtains.
And the people themselves are, well, they're like walking works of artifice.
Total masterpieces.
Bruh.
The women are wearing these robes called junihito, which literally means 12 layers, and they could weigh as much as 40 pounds.
40 pounds? Wow.
Yeah. And their faces are painted a stark white. Their teeth are blackened with iron filings.
Why? What was that about?
Because the natural white of bone, of teeth, was considered too animalistic, too raw.
It just sounds like a completely different universe, doesn't it? Like they were living inside a painting instead of the real world.
They absolutely were. But in this hyper-aesthetic bubble, there was this incredibly rigid line drawn in the sand.
Okay.
On one side, you have the language of power, of law, of government, and that language is exclusively male.
Right. And on the other side?
You have the vernacular, the emotional language.
Right.
And that was left to the women.
But our story today, it's about someone who just refused to stay on her side of that line.
She literally sat outside the door where the important language was being taught, and she just learned it anyway.
And she learned it better than the men who were supposed to be the experts.
Better than her own brother.
Oh?
And instead of being celebrated for that brilliance, her father looks at her with this genuine heartbreaking regret and says, "Just my luck. What a pity she was not born a man."
That quote, it just hits so hard. It's the ultimate backhanded compliment.
It really is. But that specific tension, being a genius in a body that wasn't supposed to possess genius, that created the friction that sparked the world's first novel.
We are doing a deep dive into the life of Murasaki Shikibu and her masterpiece, The Tale of Genji.
And our mission here is to move past the simple fact that she wrote a famous book. We really need to understand how a woman in the Heian period, we're talking late 10th, early 11th century, who was explicitly shut out of the halls of power, how did she manage to define the culture of her nation for 1,000 years?
We're going to be looking at her diary, her poetry, and the cutthroat politics of the Fujiwara clan to figure out how she pulled this off.
Yeah.
So before we get into the drama, and believe me, there's a lot of drama, we need to plant our feet firmly in Heian-kyu. Modern-day Kyoto, the year is roughly 1000 AD.
Right. So at this time, Heian-kyu is a city of maybe 100,000 people.
Mm.
But honestly, for what we're talking about today, 99.9% of those people, they don't exist.
They just don't matter for this story.
Not at all. We are focusing exclusively on the aristocracy, a tiny, tiny percentage of the population, maybe a few thousand people, tops, who lived in this state of just ultra-isolation.
You mentioned the darkness earlier. That fascinates me. We tend to think of the past as just before, but the actual sensory experience was so different.
It was. The aristocracy lived in these Shingen-zukuri-style mansions. They're beautiful, open-air structures designed to stay cool in the humid Japanese summer.
But not very private.
Not at all. Very little privacy, very little light. So life just happened in this semi-darkness. And that's why things like the rustle of silk or the scent of your personal incense blend.
Or your handwriting.
Oh, especially your handwriting. Those became the primary ways you identify people. You could have a whole romance with someone and barely ever see their face clearly.
So it's a culture of nuance. If you can't see someone's facial expression, you have to read their poetry to know what they're actually feeling.
Precisely. It was a society where aesthetics were morality. If your color combinations on your sleeves were mismatched, or if your calligraphy was clumsy.
It wasn't just a fashion mistake?
No, it was seen as a character flaw. It meant you lacked the spiritual sensitivity to be a good person. And into this high-pressure aesthetic cooker, Murasaki Shikibu was born around the year 973.
Let's talk about her position in this world. She was a Fujiwara, which is a name that just screams power in Japanese history, but she wasn't exactly at the top of the pyramid, was she?
No, not even close. The Fujiwara clan was massive. Think of it like a sprawling corporate entity. You had the main line, which held the regency and basically controlled the emperors.
The C-suite.
Exactly. Then you had all the cadet branches. Murasaki belonged to a northern branch that was essentially the middle management of the aristocracy. They were the provincial governor class.
So respectable, but not calling the shots.
Exactly. Her father, Fujiwara no Temetoki, was a scholar. He was an intellectual, deeply learned in the Chinese classics. But in terms of political capital, he was often struggling to get a good job placement.
He was the kind of man who valued books over land.
A perfect way to put it. And that brings us to the education anomaly. We teased this at the start, but we really need to break down just how transgressive her education was. You mentioned this linguistic divide.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is crucial to understanding her whole psyche. In Heian Japan, you basically have two forms of writing. First, there's mana. It literally means true name or true characters.
And that's classical Chinese.
Right. It was the language of the bureaucracy, the law courts, the Buddhist sutras, official history. It was rigid, complex, and exclusively male.
So it's kind of like Latin in medieval Europe. If you want to run the country or save your soul, you use the men's language.
Correct. And then you have kana. This was a phonetic script derived from Chinese characters but simplified.
Yeah.
It was known as the women's hand.
Love letters and diaries.
Exactly. It was the vernacular, the language of emotion and intimacy, but certainly not the language of intellect.
And the assumption was just that women's brains couldn't handle the complexity of the Chinese characters?
That was the prevailing sexism, yeah. It was thought that women lacked the mental discipline for the true characters. But Murasaki's father was tutoring her brother, Nobunori, in Chinese to prepare him for a government career.
And she was just there.
She would sit in the room, maybe pretending to do something else, and just listen. She was the eavesdropping prodigy.
Wow.
And she didn't just understand it, she absorbed it faster than her brother did. She wrote in her diary later that she became unusually proficient while he was struggling to memorize his passages.
She was outpacing the male heir just by osmosis.
And that leads right back to her father's lament. Just my luck. What a pity she was not born a man. It's such a complex thing to say.
It is, because on one hand, he's acknowledging her brilliance, he sees her, but on the other, he's saying that brilliance is basically wasted on her.
It's a tragic validation. He knew that as a woman, she couldn't take the civil service exam, she couldn't hold office. Her intellect was like a high-performance engine in a car that wasn't allowed on the road as it had nowhere to go.
And that must have been so incredibly isolating. If you're a woman who knows the men's language, that doesn't make you popular, it makes you a freak.
It made her unfeminine. She was acutely aware of this. She wrote about how other people saw her as pretentious, awkward, difficult to approach, prickly, too fond of her tales, haughty, prone to versifying.
The list goes on.
Oh, yeah. Disdainful, cantankerous, and scornful.
Cantankerous and scornful.
She really internalized the criticism, didn't she? She knew she just didn't fit the mold of the, compliant, pretty, empty-headed noblewoman.
She had to hide her light. She describes pretending she couldn't even read characters on screens just to avoid criticism. Can you imagine the psychological toll of constantly dumbing yourself down just to survive socially?
That feeling of being an outsider seems to define her early adulthood, too. I mean, she didn't follow the standard life script. Most aristocratic women were married off at puberty, right? Like 12 or 13?
Yes, that was standard practice. Murasaki, however, she stays in her father's house until her mid-20s, maybe even her late 20s, which was basically unheard of.
Completely. We don't know exactly why. Maybe her father couldn't afford a good dowry, or maybe he just enjoyed her intellectual companionship too much to let her go. But it meant she spent her formative years observing, reading, and thinking instead of managing a household.
And she also did something else that noble women almost never did. She traveled.
This is a huge event in her life. In 996, her father finally gets an appointment as the governor of Echizen province.
And for a Kyoto aristocrat, Echizen was.
The ends of the earth. It was the wild frontier. But Murasaki went with him.
What would that journey have even been like?
It was a 5-day trek. For a woman who had spent her entire life behind silk curtains in the capital, suddenly she's on a boat or in a palanquin, moving through rugged mountains and seeing the Sea of Japan for the first time.
She would have seen common people, farmers, fishermen.
People who didn't care one bit about poetry or incense. It must have been a total shock to the system.
And a revelation.
For sure. It gave her a much broader palette to draw from. When she writes about nature or the feeling of isolation in Genji, she isn't just imagining it. She lived it in those snowy winters in Echizen.
But eventually she does return to the capital, and she does get married. And her husband, Fujiwara no Nobutaka, he sounds like quite a character.
He is. He was a second cousin and significantly older, about 20 years her senior. He was in his late 40s, she was in her late 20s. And Nobutaka was not a quiet scholar like her father.
No, the descriptions of him are so vivid. He sounds like a man who really enjoyed the spotlight.
He was a bit of a dandy. There's a famous story where he dressed in these incredibly flashy, almost garish colors for a solemn pilgrimage, arguing that the gods wouldn't care about his fashion choices.
I love that.
He was gregarious, a talented dancer, very active at court, and of course he had multiple other households.
Right, because polygamy was the norm. So Murasaki is just one of several wives. Was it a happy marriage?
It's ambiguous. Some of her poems suggest a bit of resentment at his absence. He didn't live with her, he visited. But others suggest a kind of comfortable understanding.
Maybe he appreciated her intelligence.
Some scholars think so. That because he was older and more worldly, he might have appreciated her mind in a way a younger, more insecure man wouldn't have. They had one daughter, Kenshi, in 999.
But the stability didn't last. The marriage was incredibly short.
Just 2 years. In 101, a cholera epidemic swept through the capital, and Nobutaka died.
So she's barely 30, she's a widow, a single mother, and she's back in her father's house. This feels like the moment where she could have just faded into obscurity.
It was the lowest point of her life, but you're right, it was also the catalyst. She describes her state in her diary as listless. She wrote, "I felt depressed and confused. For some years I had existed from day to day, doing little more than registering the passage of time."
Doing little more than registering the passage of time. That is such a potent description of grief.
And it was out of that void that the writing began. There's a famous legend about this, the legend of Heian-era.
Right, the temple.
The story goes that she retreated to a temple at Lake Biwa to pray for inspiration. On a night with a full moon reflecting on the lake, the vision for the story came to her, and she started writing the Tale of Genji on the back of a Buddhist sutra.
It's a beautiful image, the genius struck by moonlight.
Beautiful. But the reality was probably more of a slow, steady effort to crawl out of depression.
Writing as therapy.
Exactly. She started writing chapters, maybe just for herself at first, maybe for friends. But you have to remember, there was no publishing industry. She would write a chapter and her friends would hand copy it. Then their friends would copy that copy.
It was viral in the truest sense of the word.
It absolutely was. And the story of the Shining Prince began to circulate through the aristocracy. And this growing fame is what eventually pulled her out of her father's house and into the most dangerous, most prestigious place in Japan, the Imperial Court.
And this is where we meet the puppet master, Fujiwara no Michinaga.
The most powerful man of the Heian period, without a doubt. And we need to explain how his power worked, because that explains why he needed Murasaki.
Okay.
The Fujiwara didn't rule by military force, they ruled by biology.
It's the marriage politics game.
It's all marriage politics.
Yeah.
Michinaga's entire goal was to marry his daughters to emperors. If his daughter became empress and gave birth to a son, that son would eventually be emperor. And since the emperors often took the throne as children...
Michinaga would rule as the grandfather, the regent.
Precisely. So his entire political survival rests on his daughter, Empress Shōshi.
Shōshi had a problem. She was young, and she was entering a court that was still obsessed with the memory of the previous empress, Teishi.
And Teishi had presided over this glittering cultural salon. Michinaga needed Shōshi to outshine that memory. He needed her court to be the cultural center of gravity.
So he goes headhunting. He sees this widow who is writing the most popular story in town, and he recruits her. Come work for my daughter, make her look smart, make her court interesting.
That was the mandate. Murasaki joined the court around 1005 or 1006. But if Michinaga was expecting, a happy social butterfly to liven up the party...
He hired the wrong woman.
He really did.
Murasaki hated court life, didn't she? Her diary is just filled with complaints.
It is a litany of social anxiety and disdain. She found the court frivolous, drunken, and shallow. She writes about men stumbling around drunk, trying to break into women's rooms. She describes the whole environment as dull.
She felt like she had to wear a mask constantly.
Constantly. She wrote, "When they get to know me, they find to their extreme surprise that I am kind and gentle. But in public, she was guarded." She actually went back to her old survival tactic.
Playing dumb.
Exactly. She wrote about pretending she couldn't read the characters on the screens just so people wouldn't accuse her of being a show-off.
It's so frustrating. The smartest person in the room has to act like she can't read. But she wasn't just battling drunk courtiers. She had a specific rival. We have to talk about the feud with Sei Shōnagon.
Ah, yes. The great literary beef of the 11th century. This is fascinating because it's not just a personality clash. It's a clash of worldviews.
So Sei Shōnagon wrote the Pillow Book, which is this witty, observant collection of lists and essays, and she served the rival empress, Teishi.
Right, and Shōnagon was everything Murasaki wasn't. She was extroverted, she was modern, she was funny, and she flaunted her knowledge of Chinese. She loved to show off.
And Murasaki just could not stand her.
Hated her. In her diary, Murasaki writes, Sei Shōnagon was dreadfully conceited. She thought herself so clever, littered her writing with Chinese characters, and then the real burn, which left a great deal to be desired.
Left a great deal to be desired. That is a writer's ultimate insult. She's attacking her grammar.
She is, but it goes deeper. Shōnagon's style was called okashi, which means delightful, amusing, witty. It was all about capturing the bright, funny moments of life.
Okay.
Murasaki's style was aware, pathos, depth, the sadness of things. So Murasaki likely viewed Shōnagon as superficial, as someone who just ignored the deeper, sadder realities of life for a quick laugh.
It's the difference between a brilliant stand-up comic and, like, a Russian novelist. They're just doing two different things.
Exactly. And politically, attacking Shōnagon was a way for Murasaki to defend her own patron, Shōshi. By dragging Shōnagon, she was asserting the superiority of Shōshi's court over the old Teishi court.
But while she was playing this political game and pretending to be dumb, she was actually doing something incredibly subversive with Empress Shōshi.
This is one of my favorite details from her life. Empress Shōshi, despite all the societal rules, wanted to learn Chinese. She wanted to read the ballads of the poet Bai Jui, which were very popular among the men.
So the Empress herself wants to learn the men's language.
And Murasaki becomes her secret tutor. She writes, "Since last summer, very secretly, in odd moments when there happened to be no one about, I have been reading with Her Majesty."
It's like they were conspirators, huddled behind a screen, sharing this forbidden knowledge.
It really was. It shows that despite her grumpiness, Murasaki was a dedicated teacher. But her knowledge did get her into trouble. There's the story about her nickname, the Lady of the Chronicles.
Right. What happened there?
The emperor happened to hear the Tale of Genji being read aloud, and he was impressed. He remarked that the author must have a deep knowledge of history, specifically the Chronicles of Japan.
That sounds like a compliment, surely.
You'd think so. But a rival lady-in-waiting heard it and weaponized it. She started calling Murasaki the Lady of the Chronicles. It was sarcasm. She was painting Murasaki as a bluestocking, a dry academic.
Unfeminine and pretentious.
Exactly. It just reinforces why she had to be so secretive. But let's pivot to the work itself, because while all this court drama is happening, she is writing a monument.
The Tale of Genji, the scale of this thing is just hard to comprehend.
It is. In a modern English translation, it's often 2 volumes, totaling over 1,100 pages. It has 54 chapters, hundreds of characters.
And she wrote this by hand, with a brush, over the course of about a decade.
The logistics alone are staggering. Paper was a luxury item. Ink was expensive. This is where Michinaga's patronage was absolutely essential. He was likely funneling government supplies of paper to her.
I read there's even a story in her diary where he sneaks into her room.
Yes. He sneaks in and steals a chapter before it's even finished because he's just desperate to read it.
He was the original fanboy.
He was. And the content was revolutionary. Before Murasaki, Japanese fiction, what they called monogatari, was mostly fairy tales. You know, things like The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, where a girl is found in a bamboo stalk and flies back to the moon. They were plot-driven fantasies.
But Murasaki did something totally different. She went internal.
Completely. She stripped away all the magic and focused on psychology. Genji is often called the world's first psychological novel because the real drama happens inside the characters' heads. It's all about their regrets, their anxieties, their obsessions.
And the main character, Genji, the Shining Prince, he's not exactly a knight in shining armor.
No, and that's the brilliance of it. He is the emperor's son. He is impossibly handsome, talented at literally everything. But he's also deeply flawed. He chases women to fill this void left by his mother's death. He commits a massive taboo by having an affair with his own father's wife. He is a mess of contradictions.
And this brings us back to the core philosophy of the book, which we touched on with the rivalry, mono no aware.
This is the heartbeat of the novel. Mono no aware translates roughly to the pathos of things, or a sensitivity to things. But to really get it, you have to look at the Buddhist context of the time.
The idea that everything is impermanent.
Exactly, Muju impermanence. The Heian aristocracy was obsessed with the idea that beauty is only real because it doesn't last. A cherry blossom that never fell wouldn't be beautiful, it would just be plastic.
Right.
Murasaki applied this to human relationships. She writes about the inescapable sorrow of romantic love. Genji loved many women, But that love is always tinged with the sadness that it will end, either through death or just loss of interest.
It's a very melancholy worldview. I think the phrase appears over 1,000 times in the text.
It does. It creates this mood that is just distinct from any other literature of the time. It's not about the hero winning. It's about the hero feeling the passage of time. It's about the tragedy of simply being alive.
I want to go back to Michinaga for a second. We know he was stealing chapters. Was he stealing anything else? There are rumors about their relationship.
That is the eternal gossip of historians. Michinaga was a known womanizer. And in her diary, there are these exchanges that definitely suggest he was pursuing her. He writes poems that are, let's just say, testing the waters.
But Murasaki pushes back.
She does. There's a famous poem she wrote in response to him knocking on her door, either literally or metaphorically. She wrote, "You have neither read my book nor won my love."
You have neither read my book nor won my love. That is a devastating takedown.
It's so powerful. She's saying, if you had actually read my book, if you understood the depth of my mind and the sadness of the world I describe, you wouldn't be standing here trying to have some cheap fling.
She demanded to be understood intellectually first.
Before she would even consider being known romantically, yes.
It seems she remained somewhat elusive right to the end. What happened to her?
She just kind of fades out. We believe she retired from court around the same time Empress Shōshi did. Most scholars place her death around 1014, which would make her about 41 years old. But there are some records that suggest she might have lived as late as 1025.
She vanishes, but the book just takes on a life of its own.
It explodes.
Yeah.
Within a century, it was the canon. If you wanted to be a court poet, you had to know Genji.
Wow.
It became the handbook for aristocratic behavior and taste.
And ironically, in later centuries, it was actually used to teach female virtue.
Which is hilarious, considering the book is just full of illicit affairs and moral ambiguity. But in the Edo period, they sanitized it. They turned it into this Confucian text about loyalty.
Wow.
And then visually, you have the Genji art. Gold screens, lacquer boxes, kimonos. The imagery of Genji just became the visual language of Japan.
And even today, she's on the 2,000 yen note. She is the Shakespeare of Japan.
You could argue she's bigger than Shakespeare because she stood alone at the very beginning of her literary tradition.
And this brings us to the final fascinating irony of this whole story. And for me, this is the real aha moment.
It's the paradox of the important language versus the unimportant one.
Right. All those men, Murasaki's father, her brother, all court officials, they spent their entire lives writing in Chinese. They wrote laws, chronicles, official letters. They thought they were writing the stuff that mattered.
They thought they were writing for eternity. But today, unless you are a highly specialized academic, nobody reads those Heian-era Chinese documents. They are dry, they are derivative, and they are stiff. They're historical footnotes.
With the women's hand, the kana, the language that was dismissed as a plaything for the weaker sex.
That became the literature. The Tale of Genji, the Pillow Book, these are the masterpieces.
Yeah.
And kana evolved into hiragana, which is the primary writing system of Japan today. The men's language died out as a creative force.
And the women's language became the soul of the literature. It's incredible. The authentic voice, the voice of emotion and intimacy, outlasted the voice of minority.
It really makes you question what we value today. We tend to think the serious stuff is in the spreadsheets and the legal briefs, but Murasaki proves that the things that truly endure are the stories that explain what it feels like to be human.
Murasaki Shikibu, the woman who had to hide her genius to survive, but whose genius eventually conquered the world.
It's a testament to the power of the observer. She sat in the shadows, she watched, and she wrote the truth.
Thank you so much for guiding us through her world. It's been a fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure. It was great.
And to you listening, if you ever feel like your voice isn't the correct one, or you're working in a medium that people don't respect, remember Murasaki. Write your truth, even if you have to do it by moonlight. Thanks for listening.